This is a production of Cornell University.
Welcome to the podcast of Mann Library's Chats in the Stacks Book Talk series. In today's talk, originally presented at Mann Library on April 10, 2007, Cornell librarian Fred Muratori gives a special reading that contemplates the place of life in art and celebrates the spirit of National Poetry Month.
Being asked to read at Mann Library is certainly an honor. Unfortunately, I have to say that I'm not particularly strong in two of the areas that Mann Library would be most interested in. Haiku, for example. I've tried to write haiku, and I'm just not very good at it. They always come out really angry, and they have four-letter words in it, and that's sort of the contrary to the spirit of haiku, so I really don't do those. And also nature poetry. While nature does appear in my poems, I don't really write a lot of what might be called nature poetry per se. But I tried to go through and find some work that might at least suggest that there is a natural world out there, and I'll probably read a few of those. I'd like to start with a poem that will sound like a nature poem, but actually it was written last year during the war that was going on in Lebanon. And I realized as I was writing this poem that even though it wasn't explicit, that it was really something of a political poem more than anything else. It also came out as a sonnet, too, which I realized about halfway through, which kind of surprised me along the way. This is called Geopolitics. This ragged patch of land once cared for reflects the wildness of unharrowed fields. Vines and thistles, banes and warts in asymmetrical variety, entangled and at odds for a mirage of sunlight, a random dole of drop or seepage, indiscriminately abrasive, thorned and nettled in silent, unremitting strife. But among them, here and there, the remnants of an heirloom rose, now stunted, barely visible, pale pink survivor, bent and knotted in the strangling surge, unnoticed by passers-by, its final hope, the winter's brute, unbreakable truce. I'm going to have to break into some water here. That's the problem with Ricola cough drops. I know why that guy who blows the big horn always has to take so many of them, because they tend to dry out. This is a poem called Bird Watching. And it's not something I do. I'm not a bird watcher. But, nevertheless, if I only wrote about things I did, I wouldn't have much to write about. Bird watching. By the fountain, people gather to examine it. Its feathers heighten in the breeze, and the dogwood twig it perches on sways, but the bird stays, examining them back. I've never seen such colors, says the man whose dusty hat has blown across canyons and rested in the shadows of fiery buttes. A woman whose dress waves smoothly as a field of blue alfalfa before a hailstorm says, "It must be rare because it calms me." Others nod and hum agreement without meaning to. Two children, one of whom will see a planet not yet known to us, run hide and seek among their parents' legs and will not remember this moment, which plays no role in the shaping of their souls. The bird raises its head and takes flight, its wake a gold hem on the rolling air. The people go their ways, bearing a fatal anger. This is called Sensible Qualities, which I think comes from philosopher Berkeley. Barclay. Sensible qualities. It took the sea to prove a magnitude agreed on. And since those who ventured that far disagreed, slashed each other's limbs when lies mismatched, and one man's serpent dwarfed another's, our sphere of argument contracts. In fields on their hands and knees, grousing through tall grasses meant to yellow undisturbed, empiricists pack beetles into sample bags, counting legs, making notes in shorthand. Lightning apprehension is the goal. Prolonged examination changes things. They die and change. The changed observer dies. Death's meaning changes. Complexities accumulate for future offspring bred to sort them out in minutes cleared between the gathering of fuel and nourishment. Our legacy, the quantity of known phenomena, dwindles through forgetfulness to one unbudging core, what sight obliges us to measure out. Empirical poem there. Excuse me. I have to blow my nose and you're going to hear this, so I better turn. Okay, back on. Speaking again of the particularities of nature, I'm going to read this, an old poem called Particulars. And I was thinking about the film, well, the book too, Fahrenheit 451, the Ray Bradbury book where, text is outlawed and banned, and people keep literary tradition alive by memorizing whole texts. And there's this great, wonderful sort of romantic ending where people are in the woods reciting all of these books. And I realized that if that ever happened, probably a lot of people in Ithaca would memorize Peterson's field guides. Not literary text, but I'm just amazed at people who just sort of know so much about the nature around them in terms of all the particulars and the names. In fact, this poem was inspired a little bit by someone who used to work at Cornell many years ago. Some of you may have known her, Joan Ormondroyd. Joan was a reference librarian at URIS, and I remembered once I had worked at night, and I walked out of Olin Library, and I was walking across the Arts Quad, and a hawk just flew down just right in front of me, not very many feet away, and then just looked at me and sort of took off again. And I mentioned that to Joan, and she said, "Oh yeah, that's a sharp-shinned." What? That's a sharp-shinned, and it was a sharp-shinned hawk. And apparently it had lived in Morrill Hall for a while in a little cupola up there for many years. Some of you might remember it. And I thought, wow, to have the command of that and knowing. To me, it was a bird. So in any event, I guess this is a poem for my trying to come to terms with that lack of ability in myself. Particulars. For me, the birds and trees and varied shrubberies go nameless. Fly or sprout in anonymity, add their hatching to the huge accretive illustration we interpret as the world. Out of kindness, friends supply detail. The brazen hawk that roosts within a campus cupola is sharp-shinned, Accipiter vilax. It feeds on rodents, chickadees, unlucky wrens. All I know is that it landed gracefully 2 yards away as I was walking to my car, glanced around the darkened quad, and rose again, unthreatening, unthreatened, a figment. Birdwatchers rise to glimpse the spotted what's-its-name at dawn, knee-deep in a frigid marsh, camouflaged in paramilitary gear from LL Bean. Hush, the morning call, the telltale bobbing twig, suddenly a whoosh and flap, the dart of binoculars, while I'm at home in bed, still dreaming of a faceless woman whose name is almost at my tongue, whose tongue is almost at my mouth, whose kiss is like the misty sun breaking from the hills, gone, frightened by a DJ weatherman, his voice a blare of bright prediction. What dazzling light, unrelenting definition. Is that an aspidistra? Could the speckled alder cast its shadow this far south? In winter, can you tell the autumn willow from Salix gracilis? Each object extends a history entwined with legends, with other objects and their legends, and all these knitted histories solidify below us, cushioning our footsteps, preventing us from plummeting too deeply toward ourselves, toward that place of infinite receding blankness. But the ground mole hurries for its grub, the white squirrel for its buried nut, as vines discreetly weave the death masks of their hosts. I toss and heave and walk the aimless after-dinner miles, seeing nothing but paving stones, a few dead leaves whose shapelessness I must transmute to wings or palms or jagged hearts that cut against our lifelines, bit by bit and year by year. For some, there is unending delectation of the intricate, known by its proper names, its habitats and rarities. For others, people less adept at telling cirrus clouds from altostratus, the blurry whole, its parts compacted, dense, an undistinguished night, pressed heavily and without passion on the sleeper's lips. Walking up here, I noticed that even though it's cold, the spring is really coming. I could see things popping out of the ground. And unfortunately, I think I have what I would call an autumnal sensibility as opposed to spring-like. So I'm dragging October in the door with me here. And I want to read some fairly new work. These are, well, new and not new. I started writing a series of prose poems that have the theme of ghosts throughout in as many ways as you care to construe the word ghost. And I'm going to be reading just a few of these. This was called Kitchen Ghost. After midnight, the wide aluminum pot sidles from its cabinet, fills itself up with water, hovers, then sets down on the stove. From my bedroom upstairs, I can hear the click, click, click of the burner just before it ignites. A bottle of California Chardonnay rises from the wine rack, uncorks itself, and bends neck first to a waiting glass. Scent of onions clearing in butter and olive oil, of garlic, winds through the house. She is hungry again, and craving a simple pasta dish. The water boils, and above it, I almost hear her sighing. This fine dinner in the making, and no one else to share it. Every night a different dish, sautéed shrimp with wild rice, braised boneless chicken breast, leg of lamb, her favorite. Night after night she tries to lure me from my dreams with her culinary artistry, and sometimes I almost give in. But if I roused myself, carefully felt my passage through the dark rooms and doorways, avoided knocking shins against the furniture's immobile knees and elbows, navigated the narrow stairs without skittering down, backbone on wood, what would I find? An empty table in a silent, nearly odorless kitchen, tile floor pressing its chill upward to my feet, an invisibly aproned presence in the air, wishing to be understood. This one is called Guardian Ghost. In folk tales, ghosts, though fearsome in concept, are usually discovered to be benign in purpose. They warn, they admonish, they implore, but they do no manner of physical harm the living wouldn't visit on themselves. They are, when heeded in time, safeguards against self-destruction, evidence of an other world through which we might also wander after death, forever regretful and aimless and unloved. This is why they often appear to us in mirrors, disguised as our better selves, staring back in skepticism or in sympathy, attitudes asymmetric with the ones we affect. We convince ourselves that the sudden, shockingly honest revelation that arrives out of the blue is in fact of local origin, a homegrown ignition of psychological phosphor. Yes, the brain hisses. Change and change immediately before you ossify, before your life bonds to the shapeless mold habit has created for you. But that's the danger, since we have a history of heedlessness toward our own advice. Better that the message come to us Better that the message come to us in late despairing autumn with a squall of falling picture frames, listing furniture, and mournful humming from an attic room. Better it should frighten us in gauzy 19th century garb, standing at the foot of the bed, its tattered sleeves raised in warning, its rotted mouth still tingling from the kiss that awakened us. This is more or less a Halloween poem called Halloween Ghost. Oops. Ghost. As a child, I lived next door to a large decaying house. Once considered a grand mansion, its exterior was used in a silent film starring Lillian Gish. It now appeared abandoned. But it wasn't. Its longtime owner, an ancient Scotsman, still lived there, silently and alone, venturing out only to feed the chickens and roosters kept in a coop attached to his barn. Lights rarely burned at night because, true to stereotype, he disliked paying for electricity. A neighbor checked on him once a week when she delivered his modest assortment of groceries. His porch light glowed brightly each Halloween, but no kid in the neighborhood dared trick-or-treat there. I knew he was a kind, harmless man, and before she died, his equally kind sister would give me homemade brownies and show me around the exotic menagerie of flowers and flowering trees she tended at the borders of her yard. Still, Even I wasn't sure what would happen if I rang his doorbell in my plastic skull mask and tablecloth cape. One year I mustered the courage, and he ushered me in with a grateful smile. He held out a huge serving dish piled with treats, Hershey bars, Butterfingers, Mounds. I took one, and he urged me to take more. I was his first visitor of the night, probably the only one. In a dimly lit corner of his living room, I noticed what appeared to be a motionless aviary, birds on perches made from real branches, postured for song or for flight. "Go take a closer look," he said with the pride of a dedicated hobbyist. The birds were real. A goldfinch, a blue jay, a cardinal, a red-headed woodpecker, a scarlet tanager. He had done the taxidermy himself. I let him name and describe the character of each one, then thanked him for the candy. "Tell your friends to come," he said sadly. "I have so much." I turned back outside where the other kids were throwing water balloons and smearing parked cars with shaving cream. Were they my friends? A few years later, the neighbor found the old man in his living room, seated in a chair facing his birds, dead for several days. This year I'm alone in my own ample house. The porch pumpkins have been hollowed and lit, and a basket of candy waits by the door. I hear the excited shuffling of leaves on the sidewalk. I'll read one more of these and then leave the ghosts to their own doings. This is called Ghosts on the Road. If ghosts are impervious to physical elements, rain, snow, high winds, why then do they mostly stay indoors? Why not move wraith-like through the mild October nights, shadowless, moonlight shining through them? Why not spread wide-sleeved arms to the ocean breezes and let themselves be lofted over the shoreline, over horseshoe crabs nesting in the damp sand? Perhaps because the open air leaves too many avenues of escape for the living. We could leap into our cars and onto the interstate before the next twig mysteriously breaks, the next gust of wind carries a spectral tune. In motion, we are untouchable, untraceable. We could spend our lives on the road, outrunning them, leaving them perplexed at toll booths and one-way streets and self-service pumps. Now we're the elusive ones, the unprovable phenomena. If ghosts ventured into open air, we would turn their physics inside out. They would need roadmaps to find their way back to the sensational deaths they've grown to be so proud of. I should mention that the Halloween ghost poem is all true. I did live next to an elderly Scotsman who was a taxidermist and had birds all around his house. Interesting fellow. Had a Scottish terrier too. I mean, that's going the whole route, I guess. I'd also like to read a few pieces from another prose poem work. I became enamored of the prose poem about 10, 12 years ago and have been writing a number of them. The problem is that they grow into, it's not just one or two, they grow into series. And in the case of this one, they grow into books. This is from a manuscript called Nothing in the Dark. And it actually arose in a strange way. I had started writing a series of poems that were based on Alfred Hitchcock's film Lifeboat. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but that's the one with Tallulah Bankhead and William Bendix and Walter Slezak. And it was sort of, at the time, a kind of a social political metaphor for what was going on in the world. And these 5 people were sitting in a lifeboat. And I started writing prose poems kind of based on that kind of situation. And somehow that leapfrogged into a more general, a more general sense of what we like to call noir. Raymond Chandler's fiction, all the film noir films that have been made in the U.S. and so forth. And I ended up creating this kind of persona. And I would come home from work, and I couldn't wait to get at my computer and start and become this person. He had a more interesting life than I did, and I just wanted him to pursue it. They were originally meant to be totally standalone pieces and somewhat surreal, just little one-paragraph narratives in a way. But as I wrote more and more of them, I began to introduce a couple of characters, and there began to be, I wouldn't go so far as to say a real narrative, but it would begin to approach a narrative. So In a couple of these, you may hear a name or two. The narrator, the person who's speaking, doesn't have a name, but he occasionally mentions a woman named Felice, who is your sort of standard noir femme fatale. That may be the only name, actually. I tried to pick ones that didn't get too specific. But they end up being a series of meditations. Very often Kafka's invoked, and Kafka's letters, and so on. I'll just read a few of those. Throughout my life, I have attempted to predict how people will behave on the basis of their past actions. Rarely are my projections accurate. A pattern of spite and vindictiveness may veer without warning into one of compassion and self-sacrifice. Years of dedication and loyalty whirl inexplicably into contempt and deceit during the course of a single business lunch. My experience shows me that the human personality is an unstable, wholly anarchic quantity. This explains my complete lack of faith in the social sciences. This one takes place in a bookstore. The new arrivals section in Geiger's seemed dominated with books about homicide, both fiction and nonfiction. More than one cover framed a pseudo-photographic depiction of a woman's torso partially obscured by weeds or tidewater or living room furniture. I half expected to see a sign announcing that October is National Serial Murder Month. I wondered whether I had ever unknowingly brushed elbows with a serial killer, muttered insincere apologies to some despicable monster while hurrying through a half-empty street. That pale, gangling character who came to our back door when I was 12, claiming to be a television repairman, was he a serial killer? Our rotund neighbor who lived with a mother no one ever saw, and from whose house one often heard metallic scraping noises late at night. How many fragmented skeletons were buried in his crawl space? The trendy fascination with murderous personalities struck me as an obscene luxury, the province of minds bleached free of real horrors. Or else it betrayed envy. Oh, if only to feel oneself so removed from human life that destroying it took the form of a hobby or a game, a panty raid on society, a cut-rate safari. I shivered under the warm bookstore lights, against the gently chiming New Age music that sifted down from the ceiling. As if the lacerations in our souls were not deep enough already, as if the real, verifiable fears that kidnap our futures were no more than foods we disliked, Brussels sprouts or turnips. In another life, I might have been a songwriter. Sad, solid stuff, but the kind of songs that people remember in times of extreme emotion. The kind that break into the consciousness as if attempting a courageous and timely rescue. Not changing or revising the situation, no, but making it seem to make sense for a few seconds, since things that make sense aren't so terrible after all. Oh, sure, you say as the chords progress. Of course, it had to be this way. Why didn't I realize it sooner? Then the song fades, and the temporarily drugged emotion returns, groggy and lumbering, and angrier than before, bumping into the expensive furniture in your cavernous heart, heading toward the fire axe in its glass, unfingered case. Those kinds of songs. Some mornings you wake up knowing that you have lived this day before, maybe on more than one occasion. Maybe the last several years have consisted of nothing but this day, repeated hundreds of times over. But the sameness of the experience doesn't forestall age or fatigue or the feeling that the universe has forgotten all about you. You could create a homicidal monster from an assemblage of body parts or assassinate a world leader on live television and nothing would happen. No apprehension, no punishment, no peasants with torches marching up the driveway. You could weld a million aluminum lawn chairs into a replica of the Eiffel Tower and never live to see it photographed for time. You're just a wad of juicy fruit gum flattened under God's card table. The only woman who will even look at you is fate as she stands over your sink in apron and slippers, peeling potatoes and dropping them into a pot of lukewarm water. Hi, sweetheart, you say, I'm home. Hi, hotshot, she mutters, her cigarette-singed voice splintering across the air between you. You never left. This is a cynical guy. It was nothing like me. To tell or not to tell, and if to tell, then what and how much? What is expected and what is not? The universe is seeping full of clues that lead to no answers, but supply us with still more clues. How can any of us claim to be clueless when each person is a breathing vestige, a trace, a step toward or back from something? I have followed a chain of people into and through my life, and will go on following as long as I and they exist as evidence of something not my doing. Life is the crime scene, and while we whisper, "Who did it?" the perpetrator gets away, leaving us with words, a surfeit or a lack of them. Here's one more. News today that more planets have been discovered. Of course, astronomers don't see them as they might gold or turquoise spheres in a telescope lens, as ringed and polar-capped ball bearings circling orange suns. These planets are no more than infinitesimal but consistent diminishings of invisible light, read by state-of-the-art sensors and transmuted to a binary code interpreted wishfully as planet. My apprehension of the events around me is no more direct, an empiricism of derived and interpreted impulses. I observe, I act, I observe myself acting. I record the observations in something approximating a dream diary. I discover evidence, connections that can't be diagrammed, only assumed from variations in the patterned behaviors of others. Two of Felice's fingernails are chipped. They were not chipped yesterday. Something has happened. Something new has entered the known universe. And once again, that universe is open to question. I kind of wonder when we realized that hydration was important. I mean, think back. You can think back a number of years, and nobody ever had a bottle of water. Whoever, you know. Now it's like people can't go to the restroom without taking a bottle of water with them. No. But being a conformist, I'd go along with it. And it does help, too. I notice that I definitely feel better if I drink a lot of water. But the problem is remembering to do that. A few poems a bit older, but again, chosen because they at least had an occasional natural image in them. This is called The Season or a Life in Kansas. In mid-August, the sibilance of meadows stirs us, though no snakes appear, no fire winds through the brittle weeds. And the heat is something staid, established, less awkward than it was in May when everyone acclaimed its young arrival. Summer is a house we've lived in all our lives, which we are only just now hearing. The tick of heat ducts, banshee cries of water in the pipes, the settling sigh as stone foundation calls a truce with gravity. It's our house. And though we pledge we'll never move, how can we stop its moving? Like Dorothy on her way to Oz, sent spinning upward, but safe inside, watching the universe change through her bedroom window, too entranced to be afraid. And suddenly a fresh and coded world, not ours, exploding color as we've never seen, as we believe we'll never see again. This is more or less about similes. This is called Unstable Comparisons. A rhododendron so like love, no two incentives match. Though one branch genuflects in homage to the earth, another spirals upward in mimicry of chance. How gracefully human beings will live another's life. Arms and kneecaps, the nuances of grin and tantrum. You'd think it was the person people think the gestures make, but then the facial tics, the haunting lies, would tip you off. Just like a falling tree, just like a rill cut into diamonds, just like an acrobat in pain. Touchstones everywhere retreating like huge ladybugs. Yes, the parents whisper from their graves or shaded homes. We wanted dearly to inform you, but thanks a lot. And so there are the pigeons in our chests, insomniac, grizzlies at the window panes, invisible neighbors, our time withdrawn like shallow pools of rain and sunlight. This poem began with a line from a poem by the poet George Oppen, who's, as I get older, always continues to be one of my favorite poems. I really admire his brevity and his ability to kind of push open worlds through one or two lines, well-chosen lines or phrases. Though this poem, of course, started with something that I'd read by him, it does not in any way emulate that talent. That's quite different. It's called Thought Leaps on Us. Thought leaps on us in ambush. Let me start again. This is the problem with the cold. U's look like A's. Thought leaps on us in ambush, frames and doorways where we wanted to see a plotless desert, ambiguity as distant as the signal science measures from a nebula yet unproven. Now the innocence we claimed in spite of monolithic proof it never was has fallen lengthwise on our heads. Yes, this is, and yes, we are, and yes, we must do something. That constant clanging, first thing we awaken to, must do, must do, must do. Children ask why they were born, what they were given life to do, and when, goddammit, as if their small, accreting brains were working toward a deadline. Was there ever uncreased birth, ever presence without rent? We pay our lifetimes through for merchandise, furniture, and explanations, tried and used and repossessed. Lies make sense, but truth flies upward through our hands, no more than wind or heartbreak. Something a bit newer. This poem's called Think Again. The more I try to focus, the farther things recede. Crocus, cathedral, stop sign. Sunlight bleaches trees birch white, limbs ghosting into air. Then comes night, which is opposite to everything. Goodbye goldfinch, sundial, mansard roof. What have I forgotten? What did I mean to forget? Oh yes, she once kissed me as if she meant it, and in sleep our bodies nestled as if cast from a single mold. Funny how lost causes return years later, robust despite amnesia, the frightening bruises. Rumors of happiness, though scuffed and scalded, never seem to peter out. They should require licenses for remembering. Lavender, erection, wedding dress. We love the first time in a vertigo of comprehension, and then the spinning stops. Let's see. Another relatively recent one. This is called Binary Life. When you see another side of someone, it doesn't mean the side you saw first isn't there. Hello, I am butcher, drag queen, puppeteer, spy, werewolf, plumber, narcissist, pimp, diva, detainee, rodeo clown, gourmet. We should have apposite eyes, like exotic fish, so we can admire our dual selves in opposing mirrors, each unseen by the other. It's freaking me out, cries the Archbishop shoplifter, plunging from the slate cathedral roof, a microwave oven in his arms. It's sad, mourns the sleepwalker addict, watching below, but like, in a sense, it's almost not, you know? Each citizen has a story, two in fact, whose plot lines pass in darkness, one's explosive end, the other's preface. In some, we are all at once one and zero. For all I know, you are a reader rapist, stoolie saint, your socks mismatched, your closet stuffed with reversible clothing, your life a translation, unlived in either language. I should probably read one more older poem. It's, you know, it's funny when you don't look at poems for a while. You really, when you go back to them, you do look at them and say, "I read that." That's we do create distance from ourselves. Well, this is sort of a natural one, I guess. This is called The Link. It's about a snake in a way. The Link. Those were days dark pterodactyls rose, like capes above the tree line, wingspans vast, improbable. By a brook, I followed footprints big as flagstones, almost round, that disappeared in water and never emerged on the opposite bank. Heavy rain turned the woods to jungle, an aggressive menagerie of dragonflies, of black trunks writhing like huge saurians. I could blink into a world that had no place for small boys. I'd be the frail white thing that couldn't camouflage itself, there being no precedent for it, just me, dwarfed in humid air by languid vines and leaves the size of suit coats. I'd tell myself exactly who I was and not believe it. Forget parents, forget school, the missing tonsils. Forget that time crawled all around me, paws still part fin. I could forget a time was coming when woods would just be woods, trees, trees. And the closest link between me and this excavation of a memory not mine would be the garden snake I'd jab with a spade, sweating hard, chopping till my heart slowed down. It's interesting, but, well, it's not interesting, but when I was a kid, I was obsessed with the idea that there was still some place on Earth where dinosaurs still existed. Just one or two. And I think every time I looked out at any sort of landscape that was just dense, especially in the summertime, and if there was mist and fog and dampness, I always kind of saw something. I would imagine something emerging that no human being had ever seen before. It's funny. I discovered recently. It must have been the consequence of a reference question or something. But in the 1920s, there was quite a bit of literature about theories that dinosaurs still existed somewhere in Africa. And some of the wonderful old newspapers at the time that were really beautifully illustrated ran these great articles where they would get these illustrators to draw all of these, amazing scenes of people, roping Tyrannosaurus rex in the middle of the jungle and all of that. And there is still, I don't know if any of you have heard, does Mann Library collect cryptozoology? That's about as closest as I get to this. There's, if you've ever heard of something called Mokela mbembe, which in the Congo is this rumored prehistoric animal that still lives there, and the tribal people talk about it, and supposedly, the last one, there was one in 1960 that they had actually killed, and they ate its flesh, and they all died, and there are still tales going on. But there are still expeditions of people going, trying to find some evidence of this thing. And of course, they never find anything.
Which, like the Ivorybilled Woodpecker?
The Ivorybilled Woodpecker. If I'm in this building, then I have to say the Ivorybilled Woodpecker exists. You can't say it doesn't exist if you're at Cornell. You must believe in the Ivorybilled Woodpecker. This is the last poem, which has nothing to do with Ivorybilled woodpeckers or dinosaurs. But I guess does have something to do with the war in Iraq. I think sometimes we get ourselves into conditions where events become almost like the weather. We just kind of breathe and inhabit them, and we kind of begin to almost forget that they're happening and forget they're there. And I think we're almost in a situation like that now. I think we probably were more so a year or two ago. I think now it's not quite so bad. But this is a poem called The Lost War, and lost taking on a couple of senses. And this will be my last one. They lift into the gilt. Oh, let me start again, sorry. The fishbowl is starting to close in on me here. The Lost War. They lift into the gilt sky until they are invisible. Our eyes ache from looking, our throats from wishing them back. But there is no wishing now. No laying out of plates and glassware, no bright ribbon on the gate. The music has been turned down. It's as if the town had crumpled on itself. All breath expelled, ambition stilled. Months loosen from the calendar, and people leave dim trails when they move, as they must, from darkened room to street and back again. As if by sympathetic motion, they might hold the future in its groove, running the machinery of what to do. Should one day someone cry, "Look there," at the horizon, and air begin to shudder with the tremolo of bees, of engines. Thanks very much. Appreciate your patience.
This has been a production of Cornell University. On the web at cornell.edu.